So good morning. Um, Hope my slide deck is up and running. I hope you all had your coffee. I had my artificial intelligence just now, which is sort of black coffee, a little bit of milk. Um, so what I was going to focus on really was the practical applications of AI. And again, I can only talk from experience. So what will work here doesn't always work in every situation, as you can imagine. And hence, sort of one of my favorite quotes by a great statistician, George Box. He was sort of in the 20th century, one of the top statisticians in the UK. His statement was, all models are wrong, but some are useful. and and really with that in mind, I mean, I guess that's really the mindset we always have to have when we look at any model creation, data creation, is really whatever solutions we have today, are tomorrow's problems. And I never forget, going back 20 years, there was a Harvard lecturer I was working with at the time, and that statement he said at the time, and I was a little bit too young to understand what he meant, was really around, today's problems and today's solutions are really tomorrow's problems. And that is a consistent theme that has just not gotten, any less. It's actually gotten more intense. And really with that in mind, I just wanted to kind of, before I jump in, just to highlight the speed at which change is happening. So, this is a movie, Her, 2013. I'm not recommending it. It's a bit of a hectic movie. They say it's a romantic comedy. I didn't find it that romantic, and I didn't find it that funny, but it's pretty dark. And what's amazing is you got Scarlett Johansson, who's this AI voice, and the main character, this guy develops this intimate relationship essentially with his companion. And what was amazing is kind of watch the movie back then, and it's like it's a sci-fi essentially. And then you fast forward today and you've got Replica, for example, which is got a whole lot of interesting questions going on about it, but it's really the start of exactly what happened in 2013, of you now have an AI companion which is able to mimic you and talk to you and form a relationship with you, etc. And what is amazing is, like 10 years ago, this was just a sci-fi. Today, it's a reality. And the voice and how it sounds today, how it's going to sound in a few months' time or years' time, maybe you will have a choice of choosing the Scarlett Johansson as your voice of choice. And I guess with that in mind, the key thing we've always got to keep in mind is the speed at which change happens. And one of my favorite little examples of this is with Goldman Sachs. And I mean, these guys have been around for over 100 years. And you imagine this little ant over there, as you can see, suddenly pops in their screen in 2014. And who's this ant? Ant Financial, part of the Alibaba group. And they were valued at 50% more. Actually, I'd say probably 100% more, because at that time, I think Goldman Sachs was about 88 billion. And suddenly Ant Financial comes in and they're 150 billion valuation, and they're obviously going for similar markets, etc. And what that kind of story should tell all of us, and we should all be super conscious of it, is the speed at which change is happening now when it comes to not just artificial intelligence, any of the emerging markets, is pretty astronomical. So the real question that I always ask myself and our teams and anyone we're working with is, we do need to take these things seriously in terms of acting now. Like, we don't have, months or years even anymore. But with that, the word of caution, and we'll get to it later, is the importance of thinking slow. Like often we'll see throughout is people will act really fast, but the importance of just stopping and thinking and understanding what problems need to be solved. And really what I'm going to share with you today is just I'm hoping three simple takeaways that I hope are practically applicable to whoever is playing in this new space. Well, it's not that new anymore, AI. And it's really around, number one, problem solving. Two is around sort of what are some of the best practices. And again, I'm going to keep it super simple. So really highlighting, three key practices that are generally universally experienced by most of us playing in the AI space. And really what is the kind of the best talent? And really there is, the talent skill gap is a massive one. So how do we think about it, and how do, within big organizations, which I usually kind of sit on that side of the fence, you're really working between big organizations and your fintechs and your startups. This key debate and key question comes up all the time. So, when it comes to, solving problems, so just to kind of make it real, there was a great line I came across a while back, was we fail more often because of what? You know, and keep in mind the failure rate when it comes to AI projects is insane. The amount of us that will fail in an AI project. We'll fail why? Because of this. We really solve the wrong problems. And again, I could kind of go on and on about this, but it is such an essential one around thinking slow, around going before we solve problems, like are we solving the right problems? Whether it's a big bank, whether it's, as Johan spoke about later, bring the printer closer, like simple stuff like that. We can often run down a route with kind of AI initiatives and data projects and end up solving all the wrong problems. And I want to kind of just go into this a little bit more depth. But before I do, just if I was to show you this image here, what would be your reaction, right? It would be what? Anger. A man who's got a lot of frustration, who's going to fight his way through this. That would be probably the context we have with this limited amount of data and insight. But if you kind of zoom out and you see the bigger picture, this is someone who just won a specific, rally, essentially. So you got to stop and go, hey, when you see the bigger picture, the context is completely different, right? So over here, the real question we all got to ask ourselves is, when we're solving a problem, right, are we solving the right problem? And to kind of give you an example, is one of the banks we're working with, really big bank, classic style of, lots of resources, throwing it at sort of data projects. So what would you think the problem that they're trying to solve? So we would think anyone who's sort of run a business and knows the importance of commercials and what it means to run a business is you're solving the problem of the customer, or you're solving the problem of specific needs or products that the customer needs, right? So was it the customer experience that has been solved? Were we using design thinking to understand what the customer specifically needs and how the product's going to work with that customer? Was it around the commercials in terms of what's the commercial viability of this product going out to the customer? So the challenge was all of those were secondary questions, because the real primary problem that was getting solved was compliance, regulation, making sure we had due diligence all in place, etc., which is vitally important. But when that becomes the key problem to be solved, when it comes to an AI rollout, what happens is we can forget the initial purpose, which is to create a better experience, to create a better product, or create a better, offering, etc. So one of my favorite images kind of sums this up, and this is, Mike Tyson's, classic line that his coach had for him was, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face. and really there it's the importance of understanding theory versus practice. We can have all the theory, and I think Johan kind of mentioned it earlier, you can have, the top thinkers in the world telling you what to do, but until you actually get in the ring and you fight, that's really where the rubber hits the road, excuse the pun. But more importantly, it's also where you face. Like if you're in a fight and you're facing the wrong direction, you're going to get smacked in your head. And the amount of times this happens with, large corporations or even small businesses when they're setting up is really, if you're focusing your energy and time on the wrong problems, you can really get hurt badly, especially when tech is moving so fast and competition is becoming universal and global. So suddenly I'm no longer competing with people in the market I'm competing with people around the world. And those are like fundamental things when it comes to understanding, as a lot of us call it, what's the flywheel effect? And if any of you haven't kind of read about this, there's great research and insights on how to create a flywheel. But anyone in sort of the data world, the dream is really, how do you create a flywheel? How do you create something where you're creating better product, better pricing, everything's becoming better and faster and more affordable, better automation, etc., because you're using the data. But the challenge is this often just doesn't happen. Why? Because we've got 87% failure, right? So Venture Beat had this thing around 87% of AI projects fail Gartner kind of pinned it at about 85%, whatever percent you want to call it, right? Those are big numbers. That means 1 in 10 of us, if any of you are playing with AI projects, there's 9 of you. If you've got 10 of you in the room, there's probably 9 of you who are going to fail, like fail completely. It's going to be a complete mess up. And that should really frighten anyone, because, I mean, really, who wants to fail, right? And the question is, like, what are the failure? What are some of the kind of primary kind of drivers that make AI initiatives, which can create so much productivity and so much value add and competitive edge for any business out there? Why is it failing? And dramatically failing. When I was reading up about the percentages around sort of the failure, practically what we've seen on the ground is, it's way higher than that, because of those folks who kind of, inverted brackets, succeed, their success is sometimes questionable, and the commercials of their success become even more questionable sometimes. So you've got 1 in 100 sometimes who are really succeeding, but those who are succeeding and getting it right, they're really shooting the lights out, and they're doing things a little bit differently. So I guess just to kind of pause for a second on what are sort of 3 common themes. And again, there's hundreds of different things that cause these projects to fail. But the 3 that I wanted to kind of share with you are just 3 simple ones that are often very quickly overlooked. Because as Johan said earlier, they can sometimes seem a little bit fluffy, but they become quite essential to any project that any of us have been involved with. The number 1, I'd say, is psychology. So those who are making the decisions when it comes to problem solving and how we're going to use AI, the people who are making it got to ask, what are their biases? What are the cognitive biases? What are the assumptions they have? Do they understand AI and what AI can do? Do they understand what its application is? Do they understand how engineers work with data? Do they understand how data works across the organization? Like, all those, call those little soft and fluffy things, have a massive impact on your decision makers. Because really, when you talk about psychology, we're talking about decision making. And if we're in a big organization, ultimately, if we're going to get a budget set aside for this, what influenced the decision makers, and which decision makers need to be influenced, and how do they need to be influenced, and what is currently influencing your decision makers? And again, those questions, if unanswered, can have a dramatic effect in terms of unintended consequences that will hit you later on down the line. The other super powerful element is power itself, agendas, politics, boards getting involved, etc., which are all part of how it would work in any normal big organization. And really knowing how to navigate that, because if that does not get navigated correctly, if the board's not brought on the journey, if certain key decision makers in your organization don't fully understand what's happening here, or it could even be something as simple as certain regulators within your organization, compliance folks, for example, don't fully understand the journey, and they can suddenly make the whole thing come to a stop. So those are like 2 key elements. But then one of my favorite one that also gets overlooked thoroughly, which kind of brings these 2 together, is this one here. What's that? Slip and fall down carefully. So that's what happens when you have bad translation. Slip and fall down carefully. I hope that was not the intention of this sign. But really, it's what a lot of us would call translators. And the ability of a translator are those people that can come in to any organization and be able to be a translator between the fintechs, the regulators, and the board and the executives. So in other words, someone who understands the languages and understands what the sort of benefits are, and they can describe those benefits to the various people in the organization. And the reason why translators are so important today is because, as Johan was saying earlier, when you ask people, what does AI mean? Artificial intelligence. You can have an entire debate what artificial is and what intelligence is. And again, if you're running an organization, you don't have time for an intellectual debate. You want to know, hey, how's this going to help our business? Who are the right people, the right skills to get? So really what you want is people who have real experience, who can come in and help you translate, number one, what is the company want? What does the business need in terms of its strategic focus? Like, do we understand what the strategic objectives are of our business and how we're going to compete in the next 2-3 years, so that when Mike Tyson does come in the ring, we don't get punched in the face and our business is suddenly losing hundreds of millions because we're losing market share. So your translators are there to kind of folks who can really understand what the strategic objective is, what the, call it the bigger landscape is globally in terms of how you competing in the market, and understand what engineers or what AI specialists or experts need to come in and really translate all the different expectations and align the various stakeholders to be able to work cohesively. Because if that's not there, it just creates an absolute mess. Because you can have the best intention, but like the Mike Tyson thing, if you step in the ring and you're not ready for that fight, all that money, time, and energy just gets thrown down. So if you can just get psychology and power and translation in place, you're kind of on a reasonably good start. And with that, a great book. Johan also mentioned a great book earlier. I think anyone doing any big AI project, I highly recommend this book, How Big Things Get Done. It's not on AI specifically. It's really on project management, because it's kind of like housekeeping. You can have the best intention of having all these great things in your house, but if you don't have basic housekeeping in place, it just, everything kind of blows up. And this book really, I must say, is highly recommended just in terms of some of the key insights. And he really goes a lot into this thing around thinking slow before acting fast. So if you're going to act now and jump in and solve the right problems, make sure you're thinking about what the key problems are. And there's another sort of piece over here. Here is the link that I'll share with you as well, share these slides with you later. But they go into sort of 8 various reasons why failures happen. And again, there's more than 8 reasons why failures happen in any AI project. And just if you can just get 3 of them right, that's a good start. Firstly, solve the right problem. Focus on that. And just before I end this section, my favorite quote by old Winston Churchill is, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And that really goes down to, when you're looking at any problem, especially when it comes to data, right? Don't let that crisis go to waste. In other words, use the fear, the momentum that comes with it, the damage it can cause if you don't adopt the new ways of working and the new emerging tech. Use that to drive the changes. But if you're going to drive change and do proper change management, again, make sure you got the right problem to solve. You're not just solving one little tiny aspect of the problem and then you misread the whole problem. So on that, the second part that I wanted to share with you was just around some of the best practices. And again, whenever, I'm always the first one to be nervous of saying best practices, because, best practices today, in 20 years time, people look back and go, oh my golly, what were you guys talking about? But over here, I just want to share, again, just 3 simple areas of what you should focus on if you're going to practically put an AI initiative in place. So from a business case point of view, from a sponsorship point of view, and from a partnership point of view, here are just 3 simple, I hope, reasonably simple things to consider. From a business case point of view, there's a great technique, and you can go search online. A guy, Gary, oh golly, I've forgotten what his surname is, Klein, that's right. He's a really, really smart thinker. And this process called a pre-mortem, so we've used it quite a number of times. It's a really fun technique of thinking about what problems could really happen. And the way to think about a pre-mortem in simple terms is, I'm sure most of you know what a post-mortem is you've got a dead corpse here, and you've got to work out actually what happened, how did the person land up here. So pre-mortem does the same thing. We kind of go, what would happen a year from now, 2 years from now? You want to do an AI initiative, or you're already doing an AI initiative. What are the things that can go seriously wrong? You have a public headline saying, here's how it went wrong, but badly wrong. So what a pre-mortem does, it helps you as a team, and the whole idea of a pre-mortem, if you do decide to do it, is really get all the right stakeholders in and get a good facilitator in to help you manage the dynamics of that team to really think through this properly. But it really helps you to deal with one of the big psychological problems we have in many AI projects is overconfidence, where a team will come in and they'll they'll have way too much confidence in terms of their capability, in terms of the problem that they're trying to solve, their assumptions around what the problem is, and that overconfidence has a massive dire impact in terms of when the rubber does hit the road and when you actually are in the ring with Mike Tyson. It ends up that there are a whole lot of things that were just not thought of properly, and things can very quickly spiral out of control. So the pre-mortem's a great start to thinking about the worst case scenario, and there's something also called the pro-mortem where you think about the best case scenario, and then you essentially reverse engineer it and you plan backwards. You go, okay, if these are some of the fears that we're all feeling as a team, how do we now prioritize that and start putting plans in place and putting a real proper project plan in place that can preempt those things that you inevitably, intuitively know that can really mess you up as an organization in terms of getting to that flywheel effect of what AI can really do for you. The other crucial element we've seen firsthand every single time, not once or twice, but every single time, is if you don't have proper sponsorship, and I'll explain what that is, the AI project will not work. It's not that it might not work, there's like a 95% chance it will not work, never mind an 85% chance. And what is that sponsorship? And some of the examples that I'll give you, I mean, there's a big telco that we worked with a number of years ago, and they were doing a massive initiative across the organization. And really what sponsorship is that you've got key executive decision makers who are at the top of the organization, who are not just sitting on a board and hearing the highlights of what the project's about, but rather they're actively involved and they get a weekly or bi-weekly update in terms of how the initiative's rolling out. They sponsor the project. They sponsor, because essentially what's going to have to happen is, if you're going to really do real AI, it means you're going to have to work, if you're in a big organization, you have to work across different business units. You're going to have to get data from various silos across the company, and you're going to have to bring it all together, right? So to do that requires a lot of coordination. It also might require that maybe bringing in new startups, right? So now how do you now come up with new contracts? You want to bring in a startup into, say, a big incumbent organization that usually looks at a startup as a M&A, merger and acquisition, and this is going to take you, 6 to 8 months. The startup's looking at you like, are you insane? We don't have 6 to 8 months, we've got 6 to 8 weeks, right? So how do you now reconstruct your business to have new ways of contracting in new partners? How do you make sure that your CEO, your top executives are part of the decision making, so when blockages happen, they can unblock the system so that the blood flows quickly, that you can really get action and things happening. So I cannot tell you how important this really is, because again, it's one of those things like having a child, right? I could tell you all my advice on parenting, or even if you see a startup as a child, right? A startup person who's taken a startup and scaled it can tell you all the advice, but until you actually do it, you'll kind of see, oh man, if only you told me, but I did tell you, right? So here's the thing, when it comes to partnership, if you want to look at a great example of a company that we met in Berlin, there's a company called Axel Springer, a German media company, and Matthias, who was the CEO at the time, he did some exceptional things in terms of sponsoring digital change and sponsoring bringing in startups into the core of the business. I mean, I think they brought in something like 120 or something like that, startups into the core of their business, which obviously changed the very nature of how their business worked. But not only that, they had to completely redesign not just the architecture of their business, but also how they contract with all these new businesses coming in. And all those things don't happen on a, call it a middle management level. It has to happen from senior executives being part of the journey. And more importantly, senior executives, like most senior executives, they're not gods as much as they might want to be, but they're normal humans who don't have all the answers. So a lot of them really need to be trained up in terms of, what is this new environment? What is artificial intelligence? What are the key people who are really doing stuff? And like, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the space as well. So like, who really are the real ones and who aren't the real ones? And they need to be educated on what that looks like and what it means for their business. And then the last one, under sort of, some of the better practices, is really partnership. And what's amazing is, a great Boston Consulting article I highly recommend. They kind of had this sort of statistic of 95, 1 out of 5, 3x, 7x. What does that mean? What they were saying is, and keep in mind, just in this study that they did, they really focused not on tech savvy companies, they specifically focused on companies that were not tech savvy. Specifically because a lot of the tech savvy companies were much more mature in their AI journey. So they looked at companies who were still getting into the AI journey. So 95% of those companies said, we really need AI partnerships. Like, we cannot do it on our own. We need to go find AI experts, startups, scale-ups, accelerators, whatever you want to call it, that we can help us actually solve these problems with us. Of those businesses that decided that, you had 1 out of 5 of them that were able to do it well. In other words, they were able to get the partnership happening. So 1 out of 5, right? That's like 20%. So of those 20%, so you have only 1 out of 5 that are actually working. But those who were working, they were finding they were getting at least a 3x financial impact in terms of their financial success was 3 times better. And that's pretty impressive. Again, if you start doing the calculation on the numbers, you're not talking 10x, but 3x is not a bad start. And they found they had, like, when they say 7x, they get a 7x impact. It was 7x better, the likelihood of it integrating across the various business units. And these are very large organizations. They looked at about 600 companies across various sectors and various markets. They had a 7x ability to actually integrate it across various business units, which again makes your commercial success so much better, because it means you don't just have one business unit doing this, you have multiple business units doing it, and you're able to get a much better, not just a data view, but a better commercial view for the business. So on that, when it comes to really partnerships, the importance of partnerships is vital to a lot of organizational success. Why? Because if it's a big incumbent, and this is the challenge we've seen firsthand, as a big organization, what happens is you want to own the expertise. And a lot of the top AI experts in the world do not want to be owned, and we'll get to that later as well. So it's really coming up with a new way of working that you can get the best of both worlds. You can get the insight and the experience of the top experts without having to control them and hence lose them eventually. So the ability to partner and knowing how to partner, I would say if you can work that out, you're really on a good path. So the last element I really want to share with you was what we'd call the skills gap, which really talks to talent. Like, how do we understand talent in this new market space? So any of the stats you'll read today, you'll hear about the skills gap and how massive the skills gap is and how much it's costing us. But then on the flip side, you'll also hear a good story. And what's the good story? The good story is that you've got, like in South Africa, for example, you've got the government spending tens of millions of dollars of upskilling youngsters who are going into the space. If you look at one of my favorite markets all the time is to go look at Singapore in terms of how they've built their market up in terms of being a tech first marketplace. And they did this years ago together with the government, together with private organizations, together with educational institutions, etc. They said, we need to build the skills now, today. This is many, many years ago. And it's a journey, and it's a fantastic journey. But there's a fundamental problem. What's that problem like we need to solve over here? The problem is work experience. Again, it's the Mike Tyson thing. I can read 100 books around what it is to fight. I can practice in the fighting ring. But until I've had a real fight, until I've walked into the ring, there's a massive difference. Again, like the child experience, when you raise a kid, you can give everyone the best kind of talks about what it means to raise kids, but until you've actually had it, that differentiator is massive. So to find people who have that experience is hugely difficult, and it's not an easy thing. And I wish I could say I had a golden bullet or a silver bullet, let's just say, that I could give you, but it really does require a lot of looking around and if you do find people out there who have real experience in this space, really stay close to them, get them in, and work different ways of how to work with them. Just know that the traditional way of owning them or trying to control all their IP, etc., it's not working for a lot of folks. But there are a a lot of big incumbents out there who are getting it right. They're working ways of how to work differently with some of these really amazing, AI experts out there who are really getting it right. And the advantage it gives the business is just astronomical. So really, when it comes to this battle, excuse the battle analogy, but when you're in business long enough, you kind of see business as just one continuous battle. So when we're battling it out, like the battle of ownership versus partnership comes up every single time. And I one of the top IT folks I was working with in one of the big banks, he had such a great analogy for me. So we were doing a project. It was in India, using a whole lot of AI, experts over there, etc. And his analogy was this: compare it to a cook and a master chef. And here we're specifically talking about talent and nurturing the best talent and the skills gap, and how do you actually understand and bring talent into your organization. So his analogy was, you've got a master chef. Who's a master chef is just phenomenal. You're going to get the best meal possible. In other words, as an AI expert, this person's going to be able to cook up models for you that are already going to, instead of taking 8 months or a year, just to give an example, one of my close colleagues I work with did a project competing against a big consulting house, right? The consulting house had about 5 AI data experts, and it was against him, right? It took them about a month and a half, about 6 to 7 weeks to build their model. It took him within 24 hours, actually he said about 5 hours. 5 hours, right? One person versus 4 or 5 people taking, 6 to 8 weeks. And the accuracy of his model was phenomenal. So you're kind of going, look, that differentiator is not, it's an exponential differentiator. It's a differentiator between a master chef and a cook. A cook is someone the master chef can train. The cook will follow a recipe. The master chef will make you recipes you've never seen before. He'll delight you in ways that you never even thought were kind of possible, right? So, but the challenge is, if you think of it like a master chef, the real question you've got to ask yourself is, how do you keep a master chef? If you bring a master chef in and you say, you do this and you work like this, the guy's got like 20 different offers around the world that he can go to. He's going to go, well, no, stuff this, I'm going somewhere else, right? So to understand, when you get really top talent, you've got to understand that there's a journey on how you bring them in, how you attract them, how you retain them, how you incentivize them, and how you partner with them. Like, that is by no means a simple solution, and I'm not going to pretend to propose one here, but there are people who have done it many times before, and my kind of suggestion to any of you who are in this space of trying to find master chefs is think about it like that. Think about if you have to get some incredible talent, you don't want to own them. You don't want them to feel, oh my, I'm like restrained. You want to keep them open to the relationship and really get the best out of them and get them to train up your cooks, right? And those you can own. So on that note, I kind of wanted to kind of finish off on really, how do we unlock talent? And maybe over here, the thing to think about is really, in closing, is the elements that we've kind of gone through, which is really, number one is, from a problem solving point of view, when we've got top talent, if you've got a master chef in your company or you've got access to a master chef to partner with, you really want them to help you problem solve together. Because remember, like any good translator, the analogy I always like to give is imagine you're now going to Japan to do business. The only problem is, you and me, we don't speak Japanese, right? So we're going to go there, we're going to sit down at this table, and they're going to serve the food, and we're going to start having a conversation. There's a whole subculture and a whole non-spoken element that's happening in this whole interaction, right? That neither of us are going to probably pick up on, right? Why? Because maybe we don't have a familiarity with this particular culture. We don't understand how business is transacted on very detailed nuances. We don't understand that maybe a certain way of, a certain part of the meal is not going straight into business. It's actually just kind of the connection of the human beings. So if you take that into this problem solving context as well, if we go into Japan, you're saying Japan is essentially AI. We're going into a world where a lot of us don't necessarily have the skills and the language that's necessary. You want a translator to say, help me understand, like, what can we do with this? Or is this real? Is this not real? And really make sure that we're speaking the same language and that we're on the same page, essentially. I mean, it's that simple and that difficult, to put it lightly. And really, you want to make sure you've got certain master chefs close to you that when you start doing this, they'll help you see things and understand things that you didn't even think were possible for the next year, or not even think possible. You didn't even think of the application in terms of what it can do for your business and the future success of your business. And then obviously it comes to, you know, what are those best practices? So again, if you can just put basic things in, just make sure you do a pre-mortem, make sure you have the right sponsors, make sure you do have the right partners around you. Just simple stuff like that can make a massive difference. And then obviously, as we've spoken about, you know, make sure you got those master chefs, you know, close by. And with that, you know, this is a lovely picture. I always kind of feel sums up what having an unfair competitive advantage looks like. Because an unfair competitive advantage means that you have started to master a flywheel effect. You have started to use data and automation and all the best stuff that new, call it emerging tech, has to offer. You've now got it underway. And when you do, the competitive advantage is astronomical. Like those who have mastered, whether it's the Amazons of the world, or in South Africa, you know, we've got, you know, Discovery, for example, is a good example of folks who've, you know, designed their own flywheel and really kind of mastered that. If you get that flywheel happening, the advantage it gives you in terms of what it does to your products, what it does to your pricing, what it does to the offering that you have for, you know, the folks, the customers like you and me, is massive. And really on that note, I want to just end off with one last line, which I love from sort of Margaret Mead, is you're absolutely unique. And what I mean by that is every single one of us, when we have a problem to solve and when we're engaged with AI initiatives, etc., you might feel that you're the only one, that you've never seen these problems before, or these are only problems unique to you. And really the message is no. You're just like everyone else. You're absolutely unique, but you're just like everyone else. And really what that means is there is a community. And you know, one of the things I guess that, you know, that we're trying to do over here is kind of create some sort of community where instead of trying to work it out on your own, try get some of the best practices, best thinkers, best minds into sort of a community, whether it's a virtual community or a physical community, that you can start sharing and going, okay, we're solving these kind of problems. What are the things we need to look out for? And I think if we can structure those relationships correctly and those communities correctly, it is of significant importance. I mean, the kind of other elements that I haven't spoken about, but my colleagues have obviously will speak about more, is the unintended consequences that when we design these artificial intelligence solutions, there are a lot of unintended consequences that don't get thought of. You know, sometimes, you know, in business we'll solve business problems, but we won't realize that there are a whole lot of other knock-on effects that could be significantly terrible, or even get us closed down by the regulator, that haven't been properly thought through. And that's kind of where you want various perspectives and various people with, you know, thinking differently on these problems to kind of help us see the whole picture. So we're not just seeing little cut-out parts of the picture. We're not just solving the problem in one tiny area, but we're kind of trying to see the whole problem, so that when we do solve for it, we're getting a much better outcome. And really on that note, I just wish you all the best, and on your AI initiatives, I hope you don't have Mike Tyson hitting you too hard in the face. Thank you.
Akiva, thank you. That was there was so much wisdom in what you shared.